Section 18 of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This Legamus recording may be distributed and adapted freely for any purpose. Chapter 6, Part 4. The whole of her darkened and settled, as when some foil whose addition makes the round and solidity of a surface is added to it, and the shallow becomes deep and the near distant, and all is contained as water is contained by the sides of a well. So she was now darkened, stilled, and become, with the addition of this Orlando, what is called, rightly or wrongly, a single self, a real self. And she fell silent. For it is probable that when people talk aloud, the selves, of which there may be more than 2,000, are conscious of disseverment, and are trying to communicate, but when communication is established they fall silent. Masterfully, swiftly, she drove up the curving drive between the elms and oaks, through the falling turf of the park, whose fall was so gentle that had it been water, it would have spread the beach with a smooth green tide. Planted here and in solemn groups were beech trees and oak trees. The deer stepped among them, one as white as snow, another with its head on one side, for some wire netting had caught in its horns. All this, the trees, deer, and turf, she observed with the greatest satisfaction, as if her mind had become a fluid that flowed round things and enclosed them completely. Next minute she drew up in the courtyard, where, for so many 100 years she had come, on horseback or in coach and six, with men riding before or coming after, where plumes had tossed, torches flashed, and the same flowering trees that let their leaves drop had now shaken their blossoms. Now she was alone. The autumn leaves were falling. The porter opened the great gates. "Morning, James," she said. "There's some things in the car. Will you bring 'em in?" Words of no beauty, interest, or significance themselves, it will be conceded, but now so plumped out with meaning that they fell like ripe nuts from a tree, and proved that when the shrivelled skin of the ordinary is stuffed out with meaning, it satisfies the senses amazingly. This was true indeed of every movement and action now, usual though they were, so that to see Orlando change her skirt for a pair of whipcord breeches and leather jacket, which she did in less than 3 minutes, was to be ravished with the beauty of movement, as if Madame Lopakova were using her highest art. Then she strode into the dining-room, where her old friends Dryden, Pope, Swift, Addison, regarded her demurely at first, as who should say, "Here's the prize-winner." But when they reflected that 200 guineas was in question, they nodded their heads approvingly. 200 guineas, they seemed to say. 200 guineas are not to be sniffed at. She cut herself a slice of bread and ham, clapped the two together and began to eat, striding up and down the room, thus shedding her company habits in a second, without thinking. After 5 or 6 such turns, she tossed off a glass of red Spanish wine, and filling another, which she carried in her hand, strode down the long corridor and through a dozen drawing-rooms, and so began a perambulation of the house, attended by such elk-hounds and spaniels as chose to follow her. This, too, was all in the day's routine. As soon would she come home and leave her own grandmother without a kiss, as come back and leave the house unvisited. She fancied that the rooms brightened as she came in, stirred, opened their eyes, as if they had been dozing in her absence. She fancied, too, that, hundreds and hundreds of times as she had seen them, they never looked the same twice, as if so long a life as theirs had stored in them a myriad moods, which changed with winter and summer, bright weather and dark, and her own fortunes and the people's characters who visited them. Polite they always were to strangers, but a little wary. With her they were entirely open and at their ease. Why not, indeed? They had known each other for close on 4 centuries now. They had nothing to conceal. She knew their sorrows and joys. She knew what age each part of them was, and its little secrets, a hidden drawer, a concealed cupboard, or some deficiency perhaps, such as a part made up or added later. They too knew her in all her moods and changes. She had hidden nothing from them, had come to them as boy and woman, crying and dancing, brooding and gay. In this window-seat she had written her first verses, in that chapel she had been married. And she would be buried here, she reflected, kneeling on the window-sill in the long gallery and sipping her Spanish wine. Though she could hardly fancy it, the body of the heraldic leopard would be making yellow pools on the floor the day they lowered her to lie among her ancestors. She, who believed in no immortality, could not help feeling that her soul would come and go for ever with the reds on the panels and the greens on the sofa. For the room—she had strolled into the ambassador's bedroom—shone like a shell that has lain at the bottom of the sea for centuries, and has been crusted over and painted a million tints by the water. It was rose and yellow, green and sand-coloured. It was frail as a shell, as iridescent, and as empty. No ambassador would ever sleep there again. Ah, but she knew where the heart of the house still beat. Gently opening a door, she stood on the threshold, so that, as she fancied, the room could not see her, and watched the tapestry rising and falling on the eternal faint breeze which never failed to move it. Still the hunter rode, still Daphne flew. The heart still beat, she thought, however faintly, however far withdrawn, the frail, indomitable heart of the immense building. Now, calling her troop of dogs to her, she passed down the gallery whose floor was laid with whole oak trees sawn across. Rows of chairs with all their velvets faded stood ranged against the wall, holding their arms out for Elizabeth, for James, for Shakespeare it might be, for Cecil who never came. The sight made her gloomy. She unhooked the rope that fenced them off. She sat on the Queen's chair. She opened a manuscript book lying on Lady Betty's table. She stirred her fingers in the aged rose leaves. She brushed her short hair with King James's silver brushes. She bounced up and down upon his bed. But no king would ever sleep there again, for all Louise's new sheets, and pressed her cheek against the worn silver counterpane that lay upon it. But everywhere were little lavender bags to keep the moth out, and printed notices, "Please do not touch," which, though she had put them there herself, seemed to rebuke her. The house was no longer hers entirely, she sighed. It belonged to time now, to history, was past the touch and control of the living. Never would beer be spilt here any more, she thought. She was in the bedroom that had been old Nick Green's, or holes burnt in the carpet. Never 200 servants come running and brawling down the corridors with warming pans and great branches for the great fireplaces. Never would ale be brewed and candles made and saddles fashioned and stone shaped in the workshops outside the house. Hammers and mallets were silent now. Chairs and beds were empty. Tankards of silver and gold were locked in glass cases. The great wings of silence beat up and down the empty house. So she sat at the end of the gallery, with her dogs couched round her, in Queen Elizabeth's hard armchair. The gallery stretched far away to a point where the light almost failed. It was as a tunnel bored deep into the past. As her eyes peered down it, she could see people laughing and talking, the great men she had known, Dryden, Swift, and Pope, and statesmen in colloquy, and lovers dallying in the window-seats, and people eating and drinking at the long tables, and the wood smoke curling round their heads and making them sneeze and cough. Still further down she saw sets of splendid dancers formed for the quadrille. A fluty, frail, but nevertheless stately music began to play. An organ boomed. A coffin was borne into the chapel. A marriage procession came out of it. Armed men with helmets left for the wars. They brought banners back from Flodden and Poitiers and stuck them on the wall. The long gallery filled itself thus, and still peering further, she thought she could make out at the very end, beyond the Elizabethans and the Tudors, Someone older, further, darker, a cowled figure, monastic, severe, a monk who went with his hands clasped and a book in them, murmuring. Like thunder, the stable clock struck 4. Never did any earthquake so demolish a whole town. The gallery and all its occupants fell to powder. Her own face, that had been dark and sombre as she gazed, was lit as by an explosion of gunpowder. In this same light everything near her showed with extreme distinctness. She saw 2 flies circling round, and noticed the blue sheen on their bodies. She saw a knot in the wood where her foot was, and her dog's ear twitching. At the same time she heard a bough creaking in the garden, a sheep coughing in the park, a swift screaming past the window. Her own body quivered and tingled, as if suddenly stood naked in a hard frost. Yet she kept, as she had not done when the clock struck 10 in London, complete composure, for she was now one and entire, and presented, it may be, a larger surface to the shock of time. She rose, but without precipitation, called her dogs, and went firmly, but with great alertness of movement, down the staircase and out into the garden. Here the shadows of the plants were miraculously distinct. She noticed the separate grains of earth in the flower-bed, as if she had a microscope stuck to her eye. She saw the intricacy of the twigs of every tree. Each blade of grass was distinct, and the marking of veins and petals. She saw Stubbs, the gardener, coming along the path, and every button on his gaiters was visible. She saw Betty and Prince the cart-horses, and never had she marked so clearly the white star on Betty's forehead, and the 3 long hairs that fell down below the rest on Prince's tail. Out in the quadrangle the old grey walls of the house looked like a scraped new photograph. She heard the loudspeaker condensing on the terrace a dance tune that people were listening to in the Red Velvet Opera House at Vienna. Braced and strung up by the present moment, she was also strangely afraid, as if, whenever the gulf of time gaped and let a second through, some unknown danger might come with it. The tension was too relentless and too rigorous to be endured long without discomfort. She walked more briskly than she liked, as if her legs were moved for her, through the garden and out into the park. Here she forced herself, by a great effort, to stop by the carpenter's shop, and to stand stock-still watching Joe Stubbs fashion a cartwheel. She was standing with her eye fixed on his hand when the quarter struck. It hurtled through her like a meteor, so hot that no fingers can hold it. She saw with disgusting vividness that the thumb on Joe's right hand was without a fingernail, and there was a raised saucer of pink flesh where the nail should have been. The sight was so repulsive that she felt faint for a moment, but in that moment's darkness, when her eyelids flickered, she was relieved of the pressure of the present. There was something strange in the shadow that the flicker of her eyes cast, something which, as anyone can test for himself by looking now at the sky, is always absent from the present, whence its terror, its nondescript character, something one trembles to pin through the body with a name and call beauty, for it has no body, is as a shadow without substance or quality of its own, yet has the power to change whatever it adds itself to. This shadow now, while she flickered her eye in its faintness in the carpenter's shop, stole out, and attaching itself to the innumerable sights she had been receiving, composed them into something tolerable, comprehensible. Her mind began to toss like the sea. Yes, she thought, heaving a deep sigh of relief, as she turned from the carpenter's shop to climb the hill, I can begin to live again. I'm by the Serpentine, she thought. The little boat is climbing through the white arch of 1,000 deaths. I am about to understand. Those were her words, spoken quite distinctly, but we cannot conceal the fact that she was now a very indifferent witness to the truth of what was before her, and might easily have mistaken a sheep for a cow, or an old man called Smith for one who was called Jones, and was no relation of his whatever. For the shadow of faintness which the thumb without a nail had cast had deepened now, at the back of her brain, which is the part furthest from sight, into a pool where things dwell in darkness so deep that what they are we scarcely know. She now looked down into this pool or sea in which everything is reflected, and indeed some say that all our most violent passions, and art and religion, are the reflections which we see in the dark hollow at the back of the head, when the visible world is obscured for the time. She looked there now, long, deeply, profoundly, and immediately the ferny path up the hill along which she was walking became not entirely a path, but partly the Serpentine. The hawthorn bushes were partly ladies and gentlemen, sitting with card-cases and gold-mounted canes. The sheep were partly tall Mayfair houses. Everything was partly something else, as if her mind had become a forest with glades branching here and there. Things came nearer, and further, and mingled and separated, and made the strangest alliances and combinations in an incessant chequer of light and shade. Except when Canute, the elk-hound, chased a rabbit, and so reminded her that it must be about 4:30. It was indeed 23 minutes to 6. She forgot the time. The ferny path led, with many turns and windings, higher and higher to the oak tree which stood on the top. The tree had grown bigger, sturdier, and more knotted since she had known it, somewhere about the year 1588, but it was still in the prime of life. The little sharply frilled leaves were still fluttering thickly on its branches. Flinging herself on the ground, she felt the bones of the tree running out like ribs from a spine this way and that beneath her. She liked to think that she was riding the back of the world. She liked to attach herself to something hard. As she flung herself down, a little square book bound in red cloth fell from the breast of her leather jacket. Her poem, The Oak Tree. I should have brought a trowel, she reflected. The earth was so shallow over the roots that it seemed doubtful if she could do as she meant and bury the book here. Besides, the dogs would dig it up. No luck ever attends these symbolical celebrations, she thought. Perhaps it would be as well, then, to do without them. She had a little speech on the tip of her tongue, which she meant to speak over the book as she buried it. It was a copy of the first edition, signed by author and artist. I bury this as a tribute, she was going to have said, a return to the land of what the land has given me. But Lord, once one began mouthing words aloud, how silly they sounded. She was reminded of old Green getting up on a platform the other day, comparing her with Milton, save for his blindness, and handing her a cheque for 200 guineas. She had thought then of the oak tree here on its hill, and what has that got to do with this, she had wondered? What has praise and fame to do with poetry? What has 7 editions—the book had already gone into no less—got to do with the value of it? Was not writing poetry a secret transaction, a voice answering a voice? So that all this chatter and praise and blame, and meeting people who admired one, and meeting people who did not admire one, was as ill-suited as could be to the thing itself, a voice answering a voice. What could have been more secret, she thought, more slow, and like the intercourse of lovers, than the stammering answer she had made all these years to the old crooning song of the woods, and the farms, and the brown horses standing at the gate, neck to neck, and the smithy, and the kitchen, and the fields, so laboriously bearing wheat, turnips, grass, and the garden blowing iris and fritillaries. So she let her book lie unburied and dishevelled on the ground, and watched the vast view, varied like an ocean floor this evening, with the sun lightening it and the shadows darkening it. There was a village with a church tower among elm trees, a grey domed manor house in a park, a spark of light burning on some glass house, a farmyard, with yellow corn stacks. The fields were marked with black tree clumps, and beyond the fields stretched long woodlands, and there was the gleam of a river, and then hills again. In the far distance Snowdon's crags broke white among the clouds. She saw the far Scottish hills and the wild tides that swirl about the Hebrides. She listened for the sound of gun firing out at sea. No, only the wind blew. There was no war today. Drake had gone. Nelson had gone. And there, she thought, letting her eyes, which had been looking at these far distances, drop once more to the land beneath her, was my land once. That castle between the downs was mine, and all that moor running almost to the sea was mine. Here the landscape, it must have been some trick of the fading light, shook itself, heaped itself, let all this encumbrance of houses, castles, and woods slide off its tent-shaped sides. The bare mountains of Turkey were before her. It was blazing noon. She looked straight at the baked hillside. Goats cropped the sandy tufts at her feet. An eagle soared above. The raucous voice of old Rustum, the gipsy, croaked in her ears. What is your antiquity and your race and your possessions compared with this? What do you need with 400 bedrooms and silver lids on all your dishes, and housemaids dusting? At this moment some church clock chimed in the valley. The tent-like landscape collapsed and fell. The present showered down upon her head once more, but now that the light was fading, gentlier than before, calling into view nothing detailed, nothing small, but only misty fields, cottages with lamps in them, the slumbering bulk of a wood, and a fan-shaped light pushing the darkness before it along some lane. Whether it had struck 9, 10, or 11, she could not say. Night had come. Night that she loved of all times. Night in which the reflections in the dark pool of the mind shine more clearly than by day. It was not necessary to faint now in order to look deep into the darkness where things shape themselves, and to see in the pool of the mind, now Shakespeare, now a girl in Russian trousers, now a toy boat on the Serpentine, and then the Atlantic itself, where it storms in great waves past Cape Horn. She looked into the darkness. There was her husband's brig, rising to the top of the wave. Up it went, and up and up. The white arch of 1,000 deaths rose before it. Oh, rash, oh, ridiculous man, always sailing so uselessly round Cape Horn in the teeth of a gale! But the brig was through the arch and out on the other side. It was safe at last. "Ecstasy!" she cried. "Ecstasy!" And then the wind sank, the waters grew calm, and she saw the waves rippling peacefully in the moonlight. "Marmaduke Bonthrop Shelmardine!" she cried, standing by the oak tree. The beautiful glittering name fell out of the sky like a steel-blue feather. She watched it fall, turning and twisting, like a slow-falling arrow that cleaves the deep air beautifully. He was coming, as he always came, in moments of dead calm, when the wave rippled and the spotted leaves fell slowly over her foot in the autumn woods, when the leopard was still, the moon was on the waters, and nothing moved in between sky and sea. Then he came. All was still now. It was near midnight. The moon rose slowly over the Weald. Its light raised a phantom castle upon earth. There stood the great house with all its windows robed in silver. Of wall or substance there was none. All was phantom. All was still. All was lit as for the coming of a dead queen. Gazing below her, Orlando saw dark plumes tossing in the courtyard, and torches flickering, and shadows kneeling. A queen once more stepped from her chariot. "The house is at your service, ma'am," she cried, curtsying deeply. "Nothing has been changed. The dead lord, my father, shall lead you in." As she spoke, the first stroke of midnight sounded. The cold breeze of the present brushed her face with its little breath of fear. She looked anxiously into the sky. It was dark with clouds now. The wind roared in her ears. But in the roar of the wind she heard the roar of an aeroplane coming nearer and nearer. "Here, Shell, here!" she cried, baring her breast to the moon, which now showed bright, so that her pearls glowed, like the eggs of some vast moon spider. The aeroplane rushed out of the clouds and stood over her head. It hovered above her. Her pearls burnt like a phosphorescent flare in the darkness. And as Shelmardine, now grown a fine sea captain, hale, fresh-coloured, and alert, leapt to the ground, there sprung up over his head a single wild bird. "It is the goose!" Orlando cried. "The wild goose!" And the 12th stroke of midnight sounded. The 12th stroke of midnight, Thursday, the 11th of October, 1928. End of Section 18. End of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Recorded by Corrie Samuel.